Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today for a Learning and Growing webinar on Demystifying Disability Effects on Learning, Accommodations, and Instruction. Our presenters today are Paul Nolting and Aimee Stubbs. My name is Sidra, and I'll be your moderator today for Hawks Learning. We will have a live Q&A session after the presentation, so please enter any questions you have into the Q&A module as we go, and we'll be sure to answer them at the end. I'll now hand it over to our presenters.
This way, we're getting ready to go. Okay, we can set this up really well. So everybody can see the PowerPoint?
Nope.
Oh boy, that's what I thought my first mistake is.
I can share it, Paul, if you'd like.
No, I got it. Now I got it. I have different type of programs. There we go. By clicking up, it actually works. First of all, I'm Paul Nolting. I've been working with students with disabilities for a long time. I also taught, been a disability coordinator, have worked in maybe about 100 colleges and campuses on disabilities and different other issues. And I'm so delighted to be here. And I just thank Hawks for letting us present today. Some of the things we're going to talk about will hopefully help you understand why we give accommodations and, like we call it, demystify. I worked with a lot of colleges before, not just math, but in all the different areas. And they ask some of the same questions, such as, why in the heck do they get accommodations? But we're going to do that later, and we'll go from here. So go ahead, Aimee.
Okay, and my name is Aimee Stubbs. I am the Senior Director of Accessibility Resources at Broward College in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. However, I have been in the education field for over 30 years, starting as a VE high school teacher and guidance counselor and intervention teacher. And then I've been in higher ed as a learning specialist and director of accessibility resources for about 15 years now. So it's a pleasure to be here, and we are happy to share what we know about disabilities, but also we're happy to answer any questions that you all may have at the end of our presentation. And we look forward to getting to know you all and answering any questions you may have. Okay, Paul,
Okay.
you want to start?
Yep, agenda. Now, also during this time, Aimee and I have worked together, so she may interrupt me, I may interrupt her. It's not a big deal. So it's more interactive, and that works well. So when we look at the agenda, we're going to first look at the current status of college students with disabilities. How do we have, what's going on, what can we do? We're going to talk about types of disabilities, because within our title, we list a lot of acronyms, and some of them don't know the acronyms. Disability from the point of the instructor, that's what we really want to do. From you, the instructor, what do you see? What do you see what's going on? And we're going to put you in our places, and then also we can put ourselves in your places. So, and then we're going to get into the cognitive processing deficits, relationships to learning. What that really means is when the students learn, they got better areas to learn in their brain than others. I can leave it like that. Typical one, some people is more auditory, some people more visual. And basically, we're going to talk about those, and we'll get into those in detail, because that's how you really determine accommodations. And that's where we get most of the questions. And then we're going to talk about educational accommodations. I actually made this up in one of my books, my Math and Disability Handbook, because people said, oh, is this testing? I said, no, we got to give them educational accommodations, how to make sure they can access the materials, understand it, and use it, and help them pass the test. Then we'll do testing accommodations. We'll get into that. Then the role play may be the big deal. We're going to role play. I'm going to be an instructor, and Aimee's going to be the disability coordinator. Then we'll switch around. So that's going to be a neat information processing, because then you get to put a lot of questions in there. The next one is the summary and questions, like we talked about. So I'm going to do a couple of slides, and Aimee's going to do a couple of slides. General status of disabilities. Well, I probably don't have to tell you. What's happening now is that the colleges, universities, this is back in 2016, had 20% of students with disabilities. That's only the latest data I could find. Of course, we know there's a lot more than that. So before is what it was, do I have a student with a disability in my class? Now is how many do I have? That sort of thing. So anyway, since 2016, the numbers have gone up. LD has gone up. Specific learning disability, attention deficit disorder has gone up. And there's more divergent learning students with multiple disabilities. It's before there was like one disability, they were blind, now it's different types of disabilities all packed together, especially with ADHD. That usually has a few other disabilities with it. And then we're going to look at the disability resource offices and academic development with the departments. If you're going to learn a couple of things, and when Aimee and I do this, we're going to say something like, you need to do this. Now, we're not making you do it. You get that? But some type of liaison with the disability office, with any department, the math department, the English department, any of that kind of stuff, we should be able to do. Okay, so got that one. Okay, we're going to do the definitions quickly because when you get your form for accommodations, they're not going to have their disability on it. In fact, that's against the law. When you talk to disability coordinators, they really can't tell you the disability. Often students tell me what it is and tell you what it is, but the idea is what types do we have? And I'm going to go through a couple of them, then Aimee's going to take over. The most common one really is specific learning disability. It used to be called LD, now it's called specific learning disability. Now, these people have above average intelligence, okay? And by definition, their problems are in reading, writing, expression. That's the English one, okay? Then mathematics, that's the other one. So those are the deficits. They have problems with those. Okay, remember, they have average or above average IQ, and some of them are even gifted, and they're still having problems in these different areas. The ADHD, hyperactivity disorder, it's pretty interesting because we're having more and more. The big deal about this is more and more adults are being diagnosed with ADHD than ever before. They had the symptoms earlier, but somebody just didn't pay attention, or they didn't want to do anything. And their difficulty is concentration, executive function, which means up here trying to process what's going on. Working memory means you're doing 5 or 6 things at a time. And comorbidity means that they usually have another disability with it. And there's 3 types. They're hyperactive, that's the one you see on TV jumping around, okay? They're inattentive, right? Which means it's in my head. You can't see me jumping around, but my head's going wild. And then combined type, but we'll get more on that in a few minutes. But it could be both. Now, traumatic brain injury, this really hit about 15 years ago when Iraq and Iran vets came back. And I've worked with several of them that had TBIs. Some of them very successful, some of them not so successful, but their motivation was excellent. However, the most common TBI injury is from a car wreck, not from going overseas in the war. These are students with physical injuries to their brain. And the brain, basically, if you hit something, the back of the brain goes back, then it goes forward, goes back forward. It bruises the brain and ruins the synapse in certain areas. So it could be several small, what we call TBIs, which is football, okay, or it could be one big one. They have some problems with executive function like the ADHD students do, problems with abstract reasoning, if you hit that part of their head, and expressive and receptive language. And Aimee's going to go into that. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide because she takes over.
Okay, so I did see a question about where we usually categorize dyslexia, and that would typically be in the learning disability realm. And that's because they're typically a student might have a very high intelligence level or average to above average. And how they looked at learning disabilities was that discrepancy between their achievement and their IQ. So a lot of those students, unfortunately, I remember starting to teach, and a lot of those students would say, oh, SLD stands for stupid little dummies. And it was just heart-wrenching because they really think of themselves as but most of these students are very, very bright. There's just some kind of connection that's not connecting in the brain in certain areas. And we talk a little bit more about executive function and so on. But to also move on with the types of groups that affect learning. It's also, no, Paul, can you go back to the other one, please? We didn't go through all those.
I dropped the gun.
So the post-traumatic stress is students who have major stress or stresses in their life that can cause problems. A lot of people think it's, just related to military, but this is really, I mean, I've had students, and you all have too, that have been, victims of assaults or rapes, or sometimes it's car accidents. There's a myriad of things, some kind of violence, some kind of anything that can really impact them, and they get triggers. And it could be something like, I had a veteran that came back and said there was this little 6-year-old kid that was a dual enrollment talking about the war, and it just really set him off. And what it does, it almost sends like a frenzy of emotion within their brain. It causes so much confusion and frustration. We often will give like accommodations, like sitting in the back of the room, so they have an easy exit strategy. Many of the soldiers don't like people in back of them. Many of our domestic violence victims, they don't want people, close to them. So we have to consider that for just testing and everything in general. We also have, Paul, can you go back, please? That the other one is, you went back too far. It's the autism, which is growing in population. We talk about neurodiverse populations, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But the autism group in particular, the social interactions, that difficulty, lack of participation. I've had instructors say, oh, the student's very robotic in their speech. That's because some of them have developmental delays. My husband's a speech language pathologist, and these two categories often intertwine. The students often have a language impairment. They have a developmental delay coming through up into, kindergarten, and then that's usually then categorized. It's usually that a group of people come together and they look and they assess the student, and they often see that not only do they have a problem with social norms and getting up to the social norms, but also language. Language is a very high level of development. So students with autism often also have some kind of language impairment, especially early on. Like my nephew is nonverbal and intellectually disabled, so he has to talk through an augmentative device. So that's where some of our students really gain inclusion, and more college students than ever are neurodiverse because of the ability for them to use technology like never before to communicate and to get where they need to be. The language impairment specifically, a lot of people hear speech language, and there's a big confusion over what that means. But remember, the language impairment truly means it's a huge deficit. You think of every aspect of what we teach and how language plays a part in that. And so students having problems with reading and understanding language, but also writing and vocabulary, grammar. Think about mathematical computation and how much they have to understand language. In Fort Lauderdale, we have a huge ESL population. And so you think of someone trying to struggle to learn English language and then trying to then assess that language and provide that abstract reasoning to understand and process the language. Those students with a true language impairment, it's not about whether they say their S's and their R's incorrectly. That's more of a speech issue. But the language impairment is how that's processed, and it could be expressive or receptive. So often my students with a true language impairment, I will like give an accommodation, such as like allow a student to volunteer a response instead of calling them, because they might have the inability to understand what exactly they want to say. It's pretty similar sometimes to a stroke victim. If any of you have worked with people that have had strokes, they might know what they want to say, but they don't say it correctly, or they can't utter what they're thinking. And this happens very often with our students with language impairment. So it can be excruciatingly embarrassing for them in class to work in groups because they might say the wrong thing. And so, we really want to be, understanding of that as well, because these are students, for example, students like Patrick Dempsey, the actor, JFK. There's a lot of famous people that have had what we call these invisible or non-visible disabilities. It's not like they walk with a cane or that they look any different or they talk any different, but it's how their brain processes. Same with intellectual disabilities. Now, there's a growing population in the colleges here in Florida, and in many states. They've passed legislation within the past 5 years, especially since the Higher Education Opportunity Act came about, to really open the doors for community colleges and colleges as a whole to recognize intellectual disabilities in higher education. So you had a whole group of students that would typically be 70 to 75 IQ that would always get a special diploma, and then the other students could go on and get a standard diploma. Well, now the government has really pushed their, and especially I know in Florida and other states, they're not recognizing the special diploma anymore. So it's called what they call an access diploma. So every student graduating will get a standard diploma. That means that students with an intellectual disability, and now they've even taken the 70 to 75 IQ and raised it down to 67 to recognize intellectual disability. But those same students that were going into a special diploma are now coming into our community colleges. A lot of people don't realize that. And so they're wondering, like, why isn't this person communicating? Well, this could be a student with a 64, 65 IQ with very little cognitive processing that an executive function. So if you give multi-step directions, they're lost from the second direction. It needs to be very concise. And we'll get into a little bit more regarding, strategy and understanding that, but that is going to be a growing population in higher education. And there are programs to specifically help support this group, but not every college is going to have a program like that. And with the open door institutions, if you are in one of those, then you're probably going to be seeing a lot more in this population. Next slide. So cognitive processing skills, we talked a little bit about that with some of the areas, but this really impacts the learning and retrieving of information, because we got to think it's not just about receiving the information, it's how those students are going to process it and express it. So we have to think about auditory processing. So that's why sometimes you have note takers. There's a lot of technology out there that's phenomenal to assist with auditory processing in the classroom and the cognitive processing speed. Any of those disabilities we talked about, that impacts the cognitive processing, which means, how they understand what is being said. So those are the students that are most severely impacted from those auditory and cognitive. Those are ones that aren't going to be able to just get notes that day and then assess it and then understand that concept. So we might give them additional time for their assignments. The visual
Aimee, we're going to
process.
go through some of that in a few minutes.
Okay, perfect. So visual processing and short-term memory, working memory, we're going to break these down into pieces. Along with the short-term working memory, the combination and the short-term storage and retrieval. If you think of it as almost like a file box, and how students will go in, retrieve that information, and then demonstrate what they know. And then the comprehension knowledge, which is the long-term memory, verbal reasoning, fluid reasoning, and abstract reasoning. And then next, we're going to look at the disabilities from the viewpoint of the instructor. Next slide. So the auditory processing deficit, I mentioned that earlier. That's basically the students with auditory processing deficits that have difficulty synthesizing those words. It's also understanding words in like noisy classrooms, or if you have one of those classrooms where you're teaching concepts and it's more kinesthetic, tactile. the moving around and all of that, it might shut down their ability to process what they're hearing. The students may misinterpret words or not hear the words, so they might miss things. And this is not a hearing problem or a memory problem. It's a problem of misinterpreting those spoken words. And so some of those observable behaviors that you might see in your classroom, since you're not going to see that somebody has an auditory processing deficit, that students might be misunderstanding vocabulary. They might have difficulty picking up, or understanding the notes right away. You might see them looking really confused and trying to struggle to write things, but they're not getting everything. Spelling, reading text, and understanding lectures. So like what a lot of our students use the Otter AI app, which is it's literally records what is being said, and then they can export it to a PDF and then go back and tweak what's said so that they have all of the notes there, or a smart pen that goes back. And we'll talk about a little more strategy later on in our slides. Okay, next slide, Paul.
I guess this is me. Cognitive processing speed. How fast can you read? How fast can you read numbers? What happens when you get distracted when you read? If you start looking at these common observable characteristics, people reread the sentence. They have scanny notes. They don't write things fast. They are last on the test, except for math, because what happens in the last couple of people in math, they already gave up and just handed a test in. Quickly reading and comprehending things, numbers, symbols. This is part of dyslexia. Somebody asked that question earlier. This is a characteristic of dyslexia, but it's mainly speed, how fast you can do it. And you used to measure that on the Nelson-Denny reading test. The next one is visual processing deficit. Okay, now we're really getting to dyslexia. That's the people who reverse the numbers, reverse X's for pluses, 6 for 9s, B for D's. So what happens is they read it, they got to reread it. Now, when I look at their notes, and this is a key, I'm going to suggest you, if you want to learn more about a student, look at their notes. And if they don't have any, well, not in this one, but my previous ones, we taught you how to do some note taking, because it looks like it's chicken scratch. It's everywhere. We're over here, over here, over here, over here. And then what happens is they bring it into you sometimes, and basically you can't read it. And sometimes they can't read it. So that's like a scrambling of information. And you can pick that up by just watching them. And if you're in the English area, you'll see it a lot. Next one, short-term memory. That is something what we call 2 or 3 seconds. And it lasts about 5 seconds sometimes. So what's short-term memory? Okay, I just tested you. That was short-term memory, okay? It's auditory, forgetting all instructions, hard in groups, because I can't answer it. And then what happens in the classroom, they keep asking the same question over and over. So, and I do it in tutoring too, when I train tutors. Basically, if they keep asking the question over and over, don't assume they're not paying attention. It's that their short-term memory is low, or they have a language impairment. So what you look at too is looking at that area and understanding that that happens when we do it in our classrooms. When I work with instructors across the country, in different areas, if they ask the question twice, you just say, hey, see me after class. And then I go talk to the instructor and say, look, what this is probably short-term memory. They want to answer your question, get an answer to their question, but they can't write it down. Now you got another disability area too. Now the working memory hopefully is what you end now. Working memory is when you pull in short-term memory information, stuff from your brain back here, you put it all there. It's like RAM in the computer. How fast can you do multiple steps? How fast can you process a math problem? When I'm writing an essay, what do you got to pull in? Grammar, sentence structure, and different types of designs, a comparison contrast paper. How do you do all this at one time? And what we see here is people just get tired and frustrated because their brain is overheating, so to speak. And this is a very common problem when we get to upper level courses, especially math. So if they look confused, they may be, because they can't process all the information at the same time. Same thing happens on tests, and same thing happens on homework too. So I think it's your turn.
Yep. So the short-term working memory processing deficit combined it's interesting because we see different students, and I want you to think of a student that you might have seen. They might present themselves very together, very intelligent, they communicate well. But if they've had, we see this a lot of times with athletes. Paul mentioned earlier in the presentation about our athletes that might have had traumatic brain injury through football or some kind of sports injury. But we, also think of how many students have been in accidents and been in car accidents and so on, don't even understand the long-term impacts of that, but it really can impact that working memory and that processing. And so the short-term working memory processing deficit is now considered that combination of that and working memory. So its processing area holds both auditory and visual memory long enough to manipulate and actively work on several activities at the same time. So think about that in terms of math and foreign language, how you're not only trying to process the information and manipulate the numbers and actively work on trying to write down, or the same thing with foreign language, assess different types of vowels and how we say it and how it's written and how it's written different. So, that's doing that at the same time, but also the student with this type of deficit will also have minimal ability to retain that information long enough to understand reading material or the concept. And when that happens, often, we have to give the accommodation of, like, if it's math, like a formula cards or formula sheets, and then, a calculator to help with the working memory of the calculation and so on. Observable behaviors, what might you see in the classroom, forgetting those oral instructions and writing down problem steps. They might ask questions about problem steps, and it might seem obvious to you and other people. And unfortunately, many of these students give up or quit or stop going to class because they're embarrassed, because they might ask questions that might seem like obvious to everybody else. But they may have difficulty working in groups because of that, because a lot of people do group works and everybody has to do a call out. Well, to them, they might also have to be processing that information at a different speed than everybody else, or they might have confusion on multi-step assignments. So, having the steps written out on the board or presented on a cue card or something is really a best practice. It's kind of a universal design technique, because it's not only getting those visual folks, but also those people that have this short-term working memory. It could be that they have just gotten, knocked their head or fallen or tripped or something like that. Paul mentioned earlier the TBIs and the strokes. Well, this we often see as kind of working memory deficits and processing deficits combination with those types of students as well. But also the student may understand each concept, but can't organize those steps to solve or write the answer. So that means that we have to work through that. They might be tired and frustrated after a short period of testing as well. Next page, please. And then the comprehension, knowledge, long-term memory processing deficit. These are kind of the toughest ones sometimes for students, because, and especially our returning students, those of you in many of the community colleges especially, you're going to see a lot of students that maybe were great in school, or this happens a lot with our wounded warriors that come back and, they were great before, and then afterwards, it's remembering those fundamentals that they learned when they were in the K-12 system. So these are students with the long-term memory problems that have a minimal ability to store the information for a long period of time. The length of time which students can hold information, it does vary. But for instance, a student may learn material during the session and then not remember it for 3 sessions later. But also it could be that the student learn something that day, like vocabulary or a math equation, and then forgets it the next day. So the problems of remembering facts, verbal reasoning, it's a lot of rote memory. So using Quizlet, some of those other forms of some apps, reminding apps, things like that, really work well for these students, as well as the visual cues. And, like I said, the formula cards we use a lot with this, but some of the observable behaviors poor vocabulary, problems with remembering information. I'm sure a lot of you, as we all do, we go through these and we're like, oh, I've had that in any given day. And it's true that it could be something else that happens or occurs that might have, the foundation of concepts needed for additional learning, that we assume they have, or that they have these fundamentals. I can tell you, I have 4 children. They range from 28 down to 14. Every single one of them were impacted by COVID. I think a lot of the students we're seeing now coming into the colleges were definitely impacted. They were at home. They were spoon-fed a lot of the information, and now they're all of a sudden having to learn what we assumed they learned, but maybe it was just spoon-fed to them. They never really got it in their memory recall. And so those students are going to have difficulty retaining verbal, written information and math formulas. So they're going to need a lot of remediation. So it's referring them to things like Khan Academy and all of those types of skill sets, and Googling concepts so that they can see it in different multimodal ways. And that's how they're really going to learn it, because a lot of them are not coming with those foundations. Next one.
Yep. Okay. The next one is fluid abstract reasoning, our friend in math. What I'm getting at is, when we did research on math and other colleges and things, most math instructors are way over the chart on fluid and abstract reasoning. It's your ability to look at numbers and syllables and somewhat ideas without words, and to figure out what the answer is. Okay. And what this really means is they got to figure out the answer. So there's 2 parts. One is understanding the concept itself. Second one is generalize it and answer the problems. So what we're looking at mainly here is your stems, except for biology. Because what happens when we work with the students, we show them how to do it one day, and then the next day, it's like we start all over again. We show them how to do another day, and the next day, it starts all over again. They can't make inferential leaps. They can't generalize from verbal and nonverbal information. They may be repeating math and some of the chemistry several times. We can really measure this. And what happens here is this is the #1 processing deficit that affects math learning. Number 2 is the working memory and short-term memory, working memory that Aimee was talking about. The other one is long-term memory. But this one is very difficult. However, I do have students who have 3.9 GPAs, 3.5 GPAs, and the only thing they can't do is pass math. So what happens is it's only the math area that it affects. So what we've done with those, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, because sometimes colleges have course substitutions, we decided to jump into statistics, liberal arts, and topics, which is not more abstract, especially statistics. When we use the regression analysis on the AccuPlacer, math, English, and reading, the only thing predicts success in statistics is reading. So part of this is understand it. Part of it is trying to do what we call looking at manipulatives. That really helps. It's from semi-concrete to concrete, basically, or concrete to semi-concrete to abstract. But most of the math instructors teach abstractly. And I've worked with a lot of them. Some of them changed. Some changed. Yeah. And it's not an issue. It's an issue with us knowing about what's going on. When we do a little role play, we'll talk about that too. So that was the end of them, except for executive function. Now, Aimee mentioned that one too. That was the one with ADHD. That's the one, it's the frontal part of your brain that makes decisions, okay? And it prompts you. It kind of filters out the information. It basically looks at a cognitive flexibility in your head of what you can do, what you can't do. And it's almost like a parent telling you, say, nope, that's too dangerous. Or it's like, I'm looking at it and I'm getting distracted. That's problems with executive function. Something's going over here, lights flicking on, people talking outside the window. So we were looking at how to improve executive function. It's really a self-regulated area. And we will talk about that a little bit more later. But the idea here is how to teach the student become a little better focused and cues. General anxiety disorder, boy, this is going to be neat. So, that kind of kicked forward. Let's go back. This is going to be more important. and I may say some things that may shock you. A lot of people are looking at high math anxiety as a disability. It hasn't been in the books yet about that. They missed 5 books. They look at it as social phobia, SLD-based short-term working memory. And they did find the math gene. That is the math gene. So when people say they don't have the math gene, that's not true. They do have the math gene. It's just how good is it? Is it a Volkswagen, a Ferrari? What is it? So we really believe that we can reduce the anxiety, and we're not going to go into some of this today, but it is coming up. And the most common diagnosed mental illness is general anxiety syndrome. And that's what most people look at math anxiety as. And neurodivergent, that's the big word that's coming up. It's been around. It basically means you're different. Your brain process is different from some other areas, okay? And it's not good or not bad. Neurodivergent people are gifted. Neurodivergent are people who are intellectual disabilities or ADHD or autistic. So just watch for that word coming up. Don't be afraid of it. It doesn't mean bad things. It's just that their brain functions differently. Okay, Aimee, is your turn?
Yep. So educational accommodations and strategies. This is really what I love, because it is not, we can, diagnose so the cows come home, but it's not gonna, the focus should be on what kind of strategies, what kind of universal design type of strategies can we go to reach all of these students to really help get our retention completion rates up, but also to really make a difference with those students and how they learn and how they retain the information, because that's why we're here. So basically the education accommodations, you have to consider, the instructor, like what kind of mindset is the mindset, if I'm going to help as many people as possible understand the concepts, that's going to be a little bit different than, those developing formula sheets and information cards, and then developing mental cheat sheets. These are kind of strategies that we can say to students, make sure that they have not just that we give them a formula card, but they also understand how that formula works, that they practice on those. Some of those, the apps I talked about earlier, like I know Otter AI will, when they export into a PDF, it would also have a component, if you get a certain version of it, that will create its own tests. So those are the kind of things that they can create their cheat sheets from, is the tests from the, and that is not a cheat sheet. It's just so that they can actually visualize something on paper. Sometimes we let them use the word processors, and that's an old term for computer, but it's really is processing the words in some form or shape. And that could mean a tablet, that could mean their laptop, it could mean however they're processing that written word. And then graphing, talking calculators. Some of our students are low vision or blind students, might need these. And we're finding that they're also very, it's really good that a lot of students that have executive function or some kind of processing deficit, also the graphing, talking calculators really help, because it spells out exactly what's going on with the calculations. Study groups or campus online, online classes can be a killer for some students, because they think that they're following up with things that they might not be. So really promoting any of the, if you have a campus, a ASC or learning area or tutoring area, having them go to there, and then promoting the study groups, and then the smartphone, using their smartphone to take pictures of what's on the board visually, so that they can remember, and recording. And like I said, taking the pictures, checking grammar and spelling. We have a lot of apps out there for that as well. And Google Docs, all of them have accessibility features, study skills and anxiety evaluations. You can get those right online. Students can do that. And sometimes it's helpful to do that at the very beginning, so that we talk about it and get it out there. And then it's no longer something that's the elephant in the room. And students understand that they should talk about it and then seek assistance instead of trying to avoid. And that's what a lot of students will do. A lot of them, if they get that over anxiety and they already have anxiety, they'll just shut down, they won't go to class. The smart pens are really a great technique for not just students, but also I have instructors that use the smart pens. If you're not familiar with that, you can literally write, and it's on computerized paper, write down notes or key ideas, and it's actually recording at the same time. So it's great for like math, for example, or science, when you have a lot of visuals and a lot of explanations. If you take your pen and you just put keywords, so the student with auditory processing, for example, or ADD, they're going to be listening to the lecture and writing down keywords, but they're not going to remember to write down everything. So what this pen does is then you put it back down on the paper and it replays exactly what was being said with those key ideas. It's a great study tool, but it's also, a lot of my instructors use it so that they can download their lectures and then they can upload it into their D2L shell. Visual or virtual manipulative sites, there's a lot of those. I say, for example, some of those students come in with very, if they're a typical special diploma student that has gotten into college but might not have the background of college prep kind of courses, they might even be on like fractions. And so manipulatives are very helpful for those people that need concepts and tactile things to help them learn. And a lot of students, it's very good for them to use like cues and ear rods so that they can actually see, they're like little squares, and they can see how two squares can make a whole, and then have more squares to make there's a third and a fourth. And so it puts it together. It's something tactile, it's something visual, and it makes sense instead of numbers. Because remember, sometimes as students look at the numbers on the page, and if they have those certain types of disabilities, it will all get jumbled up if it's on the paper. So hearing it, being able to explain it instead of just writing it, those are all things that we help with, modifications or accommodations. And then text to speech or speech to text options. We got a site license at our college for Read and Write, and that does a lot of things that we used to do in the field to really highlight words and then spell it out. And there's a lot of strategies that you could utilize to help with those as well. But speech to text and text to speech really help a lot of the different. That's a great universal design tool. And frankly, a lot of the iOS and Microsoft products, a lot of Android products, they all have some kind of accessibility feature, and they've really amped it up. So that and then of course the AI, it can be kind of a scary thing, but they're also more and more utilizing that for to help with our students with autism, with the social norms, becoming more familiar with talking to people through AI. And that helps kind of bridge that gap or break the ice. Next one.
Yeah, I may want to speed it up a little bit so we can get to that. On these testing accommodations, it's yours, but what is the main ones that you see all the time?
Testing accommodations, a lot of times the extended time private testing area, we don't have as much because we have reduced distraction, really. We don't have as many in large line paper and all those. There's really the older school kind of accommodations, but we might want to use something like it might be a formula sheet. Sometimes they use more of a slow or reduced distraction, possibly headphones, the speech to text, text to speech. And if they're in high school, they might have word clarification. We don't have as many reader scribes because you don't need it as much with the speech to text or text to speech. So, but sometimes it will help them if they break down the problems, break down the steps. And, a lot of these websites, a lot of the students are, I know, using it to, what we might consider as cheating, but so we got to watch the lockdown browsers and all that. But it can also, the right technology could be helpful for using these things, or using a smart board to show the answer if they're low vision, so that they have more room to write and they can write it out, because it's going to be very difficult for someone with low vision or someone with dysgraphia to be able to write in a small space. So being able to use a smart board or a whiteboard, and they could write it out and then capture that and send it so that you could see that they understand all of the steps and so on, or some of the strategies also. Next one, Paul.
Yep. And this one here, well, we're looking at testing the combinations. not every student gets all these, and not every university community college gives all these. So this is just a laundry list of things that's going on. Okay. This is me. Okay, here we go. Instructor, when I go around and work with instructors in disability areas, I don't tell instructors how to teach. Most of them, almost all of them, already know how to teach. So the idea is, how do you teach to a larger population group? And that larger population group is some people who basically have a disability, or could some people who are mainly auditory visual. I have a few people that are professionals with PhDs who can't even visual anything in their mind. They have to hear it auditorily. So what we're getting into is the multimodality instruction, which you probably heard of for a long time. Auditory, visually, kinesthetic if you can. Universal design, yeah, that really hit when COVID hit. So that's the same thing. The active learning basically is looking at having the students participate somehow. We know that participation, especially in small groups, for a short period of time, 5 or 10 minutes, increases attention and retention of information. You can have workshops, because part of that is touching them. And I can tell you right now, some of the workshops they like is anxiety, some workshops on learning strategies, self-directed learning areas, how to do that. But the most popular workshop I've ever given is how to beat the test. And I'm not just talking math tests. I'm talking about essay tests, multiple choice tests. They'll come to that. In fact, my students tell me to change my titles and do that. And timely, effective feedback. Yeah, we got to have feedback. With self-efficacy, we would have changed the behavior. Without the feedback, we can't change the behavior. And office visits, hey, have them come talk to you. And when they come talk to you, what we want to look at is basically ask them how you learn best. What is the best way? And I'm not going to say you're going to change your teaching style, but right there is how do you learn best? Because most people are first visual and then auditory. And then make sure the materials are what we call accessible. I've looked at a lot of homework programs, and Hawks is one of the better ones that are accessible to people who have disabilities, especially dyslexia. So that's a whole different area here. So when we get to this area, we're going to do the role play now. So we got about 12 or 13 minutes left. This is going to be the fun time. We put a lot of information in your head. You're going to get the PowerPoint so you can go back over it. So what we're going to do is right now, Aimee's going to be the director, okay, of any subject. I'm the instructor. I'm going to change my persona a little bit, okay? And I'm going to start saying these questions. Yeah. Questions. I'm John now. Aimee, we've already given John a bunch of accommodations. Isn't these accommodations unfair to other students?
I know you may think it's cheating, but it's not. What accommodations do is they level the playing field. A very trained and somebody that is a specialist in reading documentation will meet with the student and establish accommodations based on their documentation, their disability, and they know which accommodations will level the playing field. It's not meant to be an unfair advantage. If the student asks you to do anything that's not on the accommodation plan, then please check with the accessibility coordinator, because it's really accommodations are meant to level the playing field and to assist them, similar as glasses do if you have an issue with your sight or seeing things.
Excellent. How do you select accommodations? I heard you just pick them out of a hat. I've seen several of them, a bunch of the accommodation forms. I don't get it. They're just everywhere. So what do you really do?
Basically, in higher education, we look at reasonable accommodations, which are accommodations that do not fundamentally alter a course. And so we will work with you on some accommodations, such as the attendance accommodation, to establish things that will have every student meet the essential skills, not fundamentally alter a course, but that also assist a student to basically compensate for where their deficits are and kind of meet this other students where they're at as well.
Yeah, but I get this, they get this extra time and they get some formula sheets. Is it you just give it to everybody, or do you use some mechanism to pick those out?
Every student that has an accommodation plan would need to be vetted through the accessibility specialist, and they will meet with the student and establish an accommodation plan, which only changes if they come back and meet with the coordinator again.
Okay, that's good. But I got a student who doesn't even use accommodations. Uh, and all of a sudden they win it on the final exam, or they win it now. If they don't use them, can't we just take them away? Because if they don't use them, they don't need them, right?
Well, basically, when a student has accommodations in higher education, number one, a student has to self-identify. So if a student self-identifies and establishes accommodations with the disability office, it might be when they're starting their college career, but they might need it for something like math or English or something where they're learning or processing new information. But once they find their niche and they are comfortable in the learning environment, but also are familiar with the material, it might be something that they do in their work or that their parents do in their work, and they're very familiar. They might not need accommodations in certain class, and it's their right as a student to not use their accommodations in certain classes and only use it as needed.
Okay, I'm gonna skip to the next one. Another thing too with this is that, remember we talked about all those processing deficits? A lot of times if we have that information, that's what we look at. You know, if they're the processing speed, that's why they get extra time. So we look at the processing deficits, we look at their information, we actually interview them and talk to them. And so it's pretty precise. So we're going to switch roles now. I'm the access director, so Aimee gets to ask me questions.
So Sue, Paul, I'm having an issue because Sue is taking photo shots of me working on problems on the board. Why? She already has a note taker.
Well, that's true. We have note takers for students, but we put in photo shots because sometimes when you say this is important, I want her to take a picture of it. Also, what happens too is that the note taker doesn't take everything down at all. And if they can take a picture of something like a chemistry area, a math area, then they can go to their tutor and show them that I don't understand this. Here's the picture. It's not like I didn't understand how to solve dual equations. So that's why we really do it. And basically, also they have a processing speed problem. They can't write the notes fast enough. So that's one of the reasons why we do that.
Okay, and so why are you giving Sue double time on tests then? How fast a student does math is part of the test?
Yeah, we hear that a lot. It's the speed for the math test. Now, in this case, Sue has a real slow processing speed. I'm not going to get into the details. Later on, Sue and you and I can come talk about that. But basically, very slow. So I don't want to penalize her because she couldn't read the questions. And at the end of the test, they're not done. I've seen a lot of students for the first 2/3 of the test, they get like 90% right. And the bottom, they don't, even though it's more difficult at the bottom, because they tell me they never finished. And the instructor said they had to yank the test out of their hand. Okay, so that's what we try to do. Correlate time with how fast you read. And if you're dyslexic, it even gets slower. Okay.
Well, Sue's also given a formula sheet. Can't she remember the formulas? I think that's like cheating.
Yeah, we can't talk about Sue, but I can talk about formula sheets real quick. It's long-term memory. They can't remember it. I have several students that could not remember formulas, but once we gave them the formulas, they solved it. In fact, I had one student we gave a formula sheet to. He went to work for Boeing. Okay, he passed his math, the formula sheet. Then he started using the TI-92 at Boeing, and Boeing said, if you don't use the calculator, we're going to fire you immediately. So the idea of the formula sheet is not to test memory of formulas, but test can they work the math problems or a chemistry problem or a physics problem.
Okay, so Sue's working hard and doing all her online homework. Even with these accommodations, she's failing. Why can't she learn basic algebra? And what else can we do?
Yeah, some students who have some problems with abstract reasoning and working memory have difficulty learning basic algebra. What I would suggest we do, okay, is that you, I, and Sue meet together, look at how she learns best and develop some plan. Now, we don't have to even talk about disabilities. Remember, we're looking at processing deficits. So basically, that's what we want to do. How can we help her in instruction and getting that information? How can we help her with her note taking? How we can help her with test taking? It's a joint project. And then we can talk about reasons why she may have been having difficulty in math.
Great.
Okay.
Okay. Next.
Resources. These are the resources. We're probably about it. So,
Questions.
yeah, questions.
There are a bunch of questions.
Oh, I bet. And we won't get all of them, but
I
we
think
could
we
probably.
answered the first one already, so.
Mhm.
Okay. What do you think of untimed open book and open note tests?
I can answer that one. On-time tests are awful.
Yeah.
The reason why I know that is I did it as a testing coordinator. On time, it was 3 days.
Yeah.
Open book, that depends on the course. I know that open book tests are the worst tests to take because people start flipping through it. Now, I've had instructors who are in statistics have open book tests because the answers aren't there. And what was the third one? Open book tests.
Open note.
Open
Open
notes. That is an accommodation that some people have done that. I think Florida State has done that. That's a decision on the
It's really up to the
department.
faculty. Yeah, because we
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
allow that.
Yeah.
We will
Mhm.
typically do formula cards, and then some instructors they might do open book, but that's their prerogative. That wouldn't be a
Mhm.
basic accommodation. And we usually do either time and a half for accommodations or double time. Because you have to consider there's a testing center and those people have hours, and that it also breaks. You could break up a test, and that's probably better to break up a
Mhm.
test or give
Mhm.
tests on the same concepts, but not as many questions on the same concepts, and kind of break down the test instead of
Mhm.
giving unlimited time.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Someone would like to know where they can find an anxiety assessment website.
There's basically a few. I mean, if you Google, sometimes I
Mhm.
think NAMI might have NAMI, National Alliance for Mental Illness, has some great resources, and they will touch base on that. There's also, I think it's the American Psychological Association that also has some, but there's some basic, there's a understood.org is another great website to really understand different types of disabilities and challenges that students might have. And they have some really good also where you can also kind of see what it feels like to have those types of disabilities also. So those
Yeah,
are some good ones.
let me jump. Another one is go watch one of my Hawks videos that I did on math and math anxiety. I go through all the steps to how to reduce test anxiety. If you want to go to the workshops themselves, like Aimee talked, and that is a popular workshop. Mind Gardens has the test anxiety inventory, 20 questions. When I do workshops on that, I have them take the test. And we score it right there. And with anxiety, there's emotionality, which is sweaty palms, and worry, which says, I can't pass, no way, no way, no way. So you got to look at those different ones and deal with one. Somebody with high anxiety has both. So yeah, we can help you with that.
Great. Thank you. This person teaches statistics and tries to minimize math anxiety on the first day, but students have been so traumatized by math that they can't get over that anxiety. Any suggestions or thoughts on how to get over that?
Okay, I did one on math study skills and anxiety. You can do that. But part of the statistics is the word itself, you know. It's almost like you got to explain what it is. And I actually tell the students that statistics is not higher level math. It's more oral comprehension. I've had students who had disabilities in math, but their verbal reasoning is excellent, will make A's and B's in stats and go into grad school. But as far as talking to students, you talk to them, show them, and most stats classes let you use a calculator. You may show some problems, examples, Another one would be bringing another student in, have a course, and they talk about it. Or you go to the relaxation techniques. And the third one is bringing one of your counselors or advisors who is trained in anxiety reduction and have them do a few exercises right there with you, and then they can be referred back to them. So we can deal with that one.
Yeah, and the more workshops and making it fun and familiar, the better. Any
Thank
other
you.
questions?
Yeah, there's one that's a little bit long. Does requiring students to complete one's Hawks Learning certified homework and complete the Hawks Learning online review with at least 50% mastery where one's work from completing the test review may be used while completing a test or quiz to be eligible to take a Canvas Respondus assessment, help students with disabilities? They currently practice this for all students, but with mathematics and statistics, PGR would benefit from improvement. Would you be able to make a recommendation?
I would talk to Hawks. What we can do, I have people there, and keep that question because I want to ask them how they do it.
Right.
One thing I do know real quick is that one of the major problems in math, chemistry, physics, STEM, whatever, and even the psych stuff is that when they do the online homework, the ones they miss, they click. What? And then what happens, I ask them, what did you review for the test? Nothing, because I got them all right. So we need to teach them a note-taking system. So if they miss some problems, they write it down,
Right.
and that becomes a review for the test, because most of my students say they don't review. But that question is so technical, I got to get with Hawks and talk to them, and then I'll give opinion.
Yeah, we
Sounds
can
good.
also get the emails of the people in the workshop and send some
Sure.
additional information
Mhm.
that we get from that.
Great. There was another comment about getting a letter of accommodations from the counselor for each student if there is a requirement or a need for it.
Typically there'll be a designated, what they call, some people call it learning specialist or some kinds of some type of accessibility coordinator. We often have, if they already don't have an IEP or a 504 plan, usually every college has to have a designated ADA coordinator and or accessibility coordinator. And then if the student doesn't have documentation, if they've come out and they say that they have a disability, make sure they get to the disability office. But if they don't have documentation, if they usually don't get it from the guidance counselor at the school, it would be the registrar or something like that. They might have an IEP or 504 plan. If they don't have any of that documentation, we usually refer to like vocational rehabilitation, and sometimes private psychologists also might give a discount if they're in college and they need an assessment.
Yeah, I think was the question also, does everybody get one to give to instructors? Was that it? Or is it how we do it?
It was just a statement, but if you would like to elaborate, please feel free.
Well, Amy's already pretty much said it. Anybody who gets accommodation gets a letter and it goes to the instructor. There's various ways, emails, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The other one is the cost of doing this. I've worked with other colleges and they tapped into student activities funds. See what I'm saying? Student activities funds at my college, we tapped in and got $10,000 out of it and hired an outside person to do the testing. But we didn't test everybody. It had to be referred by the instructor.
Right.
And the instructor knew that if they didn't try hard, they not can refer them. Or if they did try hard and they weren't doing well, especially the second time around, then we need to refer. And we got diagnostics, and actually about 90% of them had a disability.
That's great information. Thank you so much.
And the point is to be collaborative. Everybody needs to work together. It shouldn't be disability office does their thing, faculty do their thing. It should be very collaborative. And that's when accommodations work best.
All right, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Looks like all the time we have for questions today. Thank you, Paul and Aimee, and thank you all for attending today. We will be emailing you a link to view the recording of this webinar once it's available. If you or any of your fellow instructors are interested in presenting for our Learning and Growing webinar series, please submit your proposals in the Learning and Growing website, which I'm going to go ahead and link in the chat now for easy access. These free webinars are brought to you by Hawks Learning, an innovative educational courseware company. To learn more about our mastery-based course materials and how Hawks can enhance learning outcomes for you and your students, please visit hawkslearning.com, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aimee, I'll give you a call.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good.
Oh,
All
wait a
right.
minute. We can stay. Oh, they took
you,
off. We're
guys.
still on. They're gonna
Oh,
have to.
hey.
Oh, wait a minute. I know what I'm doing. Hang on. I'm trying to copy all the questions. Okay. There we go.